Today's teachable moment is about terminology. You've heard people say, crank it up, fire it up, turn it over. What's all that mean? And when you're talking to somebody, you can normally figure out what they mean. But with all my different vehicles, I'm on a lot of different websites and forums for vehicles. And I was on one the other day. A guy gets on there writing about how his truck will barely turn over. It's a diesel, and he has to use starter fluid. And then it'll start. Sometimes it'll run for about 2 seconds, but it'll barely turn over. And then once it starts with starter fluid, it's good for the next 8 hours until it cools off enough that it won't start again. I got on there, and this is a public service for anybody that has a diesel with glow plugs, especially glow plugs, but also the heater grids. Don't use ether, don't use starter fluid. Boom, it could blow up on you. Doesn't do it every time, but it can. And if it does, it could come back and take all the hair off your face. Depends where you're standing. Could hurt your turbo if you got a turbo, if you're spraying through the turbo. Another thing is bent valves and bent connecting rods. If it hits the cylinder just right. Don't use ether or starting fluid on glow plug diesels. Preferably not on direct injection grid heater diesels either. Anyway, terminology. There's a crankshaft in the engine. We've all seen pictures of the old Model Ts and all the cars up until really 1913 when Mr. Kettering invented the electric start in Dayton, Ohio, and named his company Dayton Electric Company, Delco. That was first used on a Cadillac. He invented the alternator to go with it because if you got a battery, you got to charge after starts, and then electric lights, and that's how Delco got the big start on everything. Anyway, so cranking something over is what you used to get in the front and hand crank it over. That terminology is still used. If you look in pretty much any factory manual, or like with the military trucks, the military manual, there's something called a crank no start. I'm sitting in the Miata because this is easy to do. Here's a crank no start. Just it's not going to start because I got the fuel pump relay in my hand. That's a crank no start. Now, is that turning over as well? Yeah. But a lot of people, it seems like when you read on the internet, associate the engine starting with turning over. This is a crank no start condition. So if you're describing or talking about a vehicle and it does this, it's cranking over just fine. It's turning over just fine, but it won't start. That's a crank no start condition. Now, let me put it in gear and see if I can not hurt myself. Hold the brake too. I have the clutch safety switch bypassed on this, so I'm doing something that you should not do. So I can turn the key without pushing the clutch in. See how it barely turned? That is struggling to turn over. And that normally means battery, wiring, or starter motor. Good way to tell is turn your headlights on. If you turn your headlights on and you hit the key to start it and nothing happens and the headlights stay bright, you're not getting power to the starter motor. Either directly from the normally big red wire from the battery to the starter motor, or through the on-off switching with the key. If as soon as you hit the key, the lights go dim, power's getting the starter motor, either the battery is dead or the starter motor is not turning into motion. Anyway, I just want to do a quick little video about terminology. It's one of those little pet peeves of mine. If you're going to call it something, call it the right thing. Try to start the car, it spins, the engine spins, and it won't start, that's a crank no start. That's not a struggling to turn over. Anyway, that's the teachable moment for the day. Use the right terminology.